cut engineering, they go to the MIT technology. And if they could do technology, they go to OLS, supervision. So that was kind of laid out. So you didn't have the math or whatever. Slide on the scale.
new guests that have arrived today that aren't familiar with CUP and or haven't heard the announcements from last night. But welcome back, everybody from last night. Those that attended last night, what did you think? Wasn't that amazing? I got great feedback on the live stream for those that were able to watch it online. So we'll be sharing that. We had a little bit of an audio complication, but we're going to get that fixed at the beginning of that audio, and we'll get that out to everybody. So make sure you share that video. So for those that don't know who I am, I mean, most people know, but I'm the founder and chair of Corpus Christi for Unity and Peace. And believe me, if you watched last night, today it is going to be a very thought-provoking discussion. I mean, it's going to be about Marxism, wokeism, but also upbeat, about St. John Paul II, Fulton Sheen. I mean, what more could you ask for, right? So introductory comments, CUP. How many here are CUP members? All right, so there's several that aren't, and I'd encourage you to sign up for our newsletter. If you are not a CUP member, why would you do that? We will inform you not only about our upcoming events, but we also share a weekly newsletter with new articles that I typically write each week on current events, thought-provoking topics, and also videos, interviews. In fact, Dr. Kengor has agreed that he's going to give me his story of his faith reversion. So I'll be interviewing him very soon on that. But our mission is to inspire Catholics to promote a culture that safeguards and upholds the dignity of the human person. So how do we do that? We try to focus on promoting the truth. And that's difficult in this kind of culture. I'm sure you would agree that everybody thinks that there's different forms of truth. No, there is one truth, and that is the deposit of the faith, isn't it? And we have to try to defend that and defend our church. And we also need to defend the sanctity of life, the sanctity of marriage, religious liberty. And what's undergirding that is the protection of natural law and our democratic republic. Now, why would I focus on the democratic republic? That's because if we don't have a democratic republic, you might as well throw everything else out the window. And Dr. Kengor is going to talk about Karl Marx today and what happens in a Marxist society. Everything goes out the window, all right? So events like today are meant to ignite our critical thinking, that help us spark and ignite that thinking so that we can talk to our kids, our grandkids, and others, and not just challenge our faith, but challenge others as well, and equip us with the truth so that we can intelligently, with our faith and reason, have those discussions. I really do want to again extend a heartfelt thanks, sincere gratitude for the anonymous donor who, without this person, this would have been very expensive because this person covered and supported bringing Dr. Kengor here. So a round of applause for the anonymous donor. And of course, I want to thank Ray Mills for his expert videography. And where is Mary Kissel for Oh, her brilliant photography. Wait till you see it. It's just beautiful. So round of applause for them, please. And we just love Northside Events. It's the Knights of Columbus that owns this, and they just do a phenomenal job. The fried chicken last night was pretty good, right? Yeah, it won't be fried chicken today, but it'll be good. So now, I also want to thank Regina Magazine. You see these beautiful magazines. The people last night took them with them. If you're newly arriving, you'll see those here. Those are the most gorgeous magazines with stories from around the world. And my dear friend Beverly donated those. She is the managing editor of Regina Magazine. And she shipped those to us as a gift to you, as well as Dr. Kengor brought the full magazines from American Spectator, where he is the editor for American Spectator. Brilliant articles from Dr. Kengor. You should just bookmark that and read everything on American Spectator. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't say Myrna Romero, who donated blessed candles that were on the altar at the church, beeswax candles that are in the back. And Kit was promoting that if you buy a t-shirt, you get a free blessed candle. So, okay. So they're in the back, and I'm sure Sue and Roberta will help you with that. So now, I get to introduce Dr. Kengor, and I'll be brief here. Number one, he's brilliant. He's incisive in his analysis. He is an all-out expert on Marxism, communism, socialism. He is the sought-out expert on this matter. Just all you have to do is Google it. Everybody from every news program, Ben Shapiro's had him on, 3 million views when he has interviews. He is outstanding. And as I said last night, this book right here, The Devil and Karl Marx, I read this cover to cover in Cancun on vacation, poolside. It is brilliant, and I couldn't put it down. I really couldn't put it down. It is a must-have, and this is what he is going to be talking about. He's a professor of political science at Grove City College, the executive director of Institute for Faith and Freedom, and just widely recognized for his body of work. Please warmly welcome Dr. Paul Kengor.
Vicki was kind to say that I'm brilliant, but didn't point out that I'm late. So I thank her for that charity this morning. I noticed too. So the American Spectator, we publish daily at the website spectator.org, and we have we publish print editions twice a year. And so before I left the house, I just grabbed the closest box that I had, and this one's actually from spring of 2024. And so it's a year old, and I was looking inside. The article that I wrote for this one is on living crucifixes, on the stigmata. So, which happened to be the topic for, thank you, which happened to be the topic from last night. So that's a pretty good, that article is a pretty good summary, overview of what I talked about last night. So take those with you. Also, if you would, if you'd like a complimentary subscription to the magazine, give me your email address. They do 90-day complimentary subscriptions, and it really is free. It's complimentary, and at that point, after it expires, it's up to you whether or not you want to pay for one or not. But if you have a card or an email address, or want to write it on the back of maybe this or whatever, just do that and hand it to me, and I'll make sure that happens next week. The editor, by the way, here we are in Indianapolis. The American Spectator was founded on the campus of Indiana University, Bloomington. Yeah. Right, yeah, and it really launched in the 80s. Bob Terrell, R. Emmett Terrell Jr., his name's on the masthead. He's a native son. He founded the magazine September 1967. So and he's still alive. I mean, I talk to him all the time. He's 81 years old. He's in great shape. And I was there on campus yesterday because my daughter's down there for a music competition, and just walking around and saw where the magazine was originally headquartered, right above the K Bello restaurant on the Courthouse Square in Bloomington. So right up above that, and I sent pictures to Bob Terrell and Vladi Plazinski, and they really enjoyed seeing that. Yeah, but that it's probably the most famous conservative magazine, longest running, other than National Review, founded by William F. Buckley Jr. And it was founded right down the road, right down the road in Bloomington. They moved to D.C. mid-1980s, but has its roots right here. Okay, all right. This is a lot less edifying and inspirational than the talk last night. So last night we talked about stigmatists, these holy, saintly men and women. This guy was anything but that. Karl Marx was anything but that. So it's one of 3 talks that I'm going to give today. After this, we'll take a break, and then we're going to do how the Catholic Church confronted this, communism and socialism. By the way, which works in perfectly with Pope Leo XIV, because Leo XIII had some really profound encyclicals against communism, against socialism. And then after lunch, we're going to hit Ronald Reagan, John Paul II, and Fulton Sheen, and how they worked together to take down and defeat Soviet communism. I consider Sheen kind of somewhat of a native son. Do you guys? I mean, you see Peoria, right? 465, it says right up that. But Peoria is a pretty good drive, right? How far? 3?
Several hours.
Several hours? Okay. Yeah, he's from Illinois originally, but very much like Ronald Reagan, just a product of the Midwest, of the American heartland. All right, this dude was anything but that. So let's get into Karl Marx here. And I'll start off by quoting from the Communist Manifesto. And Vicki, if anybody wants copies of these presentations, I'd be happy to give them, to share them if you want to share them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So because the quotations are here and so forth. So this is the Communist Manifesto, published in 1848, February 1848. The authors were Marx and Engels, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. So Marx born 1818, Friedrich Engels born in 1820. And the opening words of the Communist Manifesto, I find this very profound and chilling, actually. They say, a specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism. And then they say, all the ancient powers of Europe, the Pope, right, Metternich, Russian czars, but they named the Pope first, have entered into a holy alliance to exorcise the specter, as in exorcism, exercise. That's actually the opening words of the Communist Manifesto. They describe it as a specter haunting Europe and point out that all these powers of Europe, and Pope first, which at that point would have been Leo IX, who papacy started in 1846, have entered into a holy alliance to exorcise this specter. I mean, that should give you pause right there. I speak all around the country, especially to young people, and they will often say, the Communist Manifesto is a pretty good book if you just read it, right? Talks about sharing and helping the poor, and right away I know they haven't read it. And I'll call them on it. I'll say, really? Yeah, have you read it? Well, I've kind of dabbled around in it a little bit. And I'll tell them, I'll say, read it. Read it. It's about the thickness of that magazine. I mean, it's a very short book. And if you get that copy, the Penguin Classics edition or others, they usually have multiple forewords and prefaces, but the actual manifesto itself is like 60 pages. You could read it very, very quickly. And when you read that, you'll come to the conclusion it's not a very good book at all. All right, we're going to talk about that. The manifesto, they say there, and people will ask me, could you give me a one-sentence definition of communism? So yeah, that's easy. Marx and Engels did it in the Communist Manifesto. They said the entire theory of the communists may be summed up in a single sentence, 4 words: abolition of private property. Abolition of private property. So right then and there, I mean, you know, from from that, that's just I mean, to me, that's just like a non-starter. I mean, if a student turned in a paper in my class and say, oh, Professor Kengor, I propose to, in this paper, to eliminate all private property, I mean, you better be willing to really make your case there, buddy. I mean, abolition of private property, it's considered a sacred right. It's considered, some people consider it a natural right. The 10 Commandments, one of the 10 Commandments is thou shalt not steal. Steal, right? Implies the right to property. Even in Acts 4:32 to 4:35, which we often read around this time, and it says the early disciples brought all their property together, they held it in common and they shared it. And people will say, oh, well, that's communism. By the way, even Pope Francis said, no, that is not communism. All right, that's early Christianity. That's like first century Christianity. Communism came 17, 18 centuries later. And notice they brought together their property. They owned property. They had the right to property. And they were able to sell portions of it, as it says, and bring it together. But they were allowed to have property. By the way, those people, those are early Christian men and women living together in community on behalf of God. They believe in God. They're not atheists like Marx and Marxism is. And so they agree, coming together as Christians, to live in community and share their stuff and help one another. That's completely different from a state, a regime, that takes over a massive, gigantic country of hundreds of millions of people, or in a place like communist China, over 1 billion people, and forcibly takes all your property from everybody, as well as a whole bunch of other freedoms. I mean, that's a completely different thing. But abolition of private property, you do that, you're going to have to kill people. You're going to have to kill a lot of people. And they could stomp their feet and say, you're greedy with your property. Too bad. You don't do this unless you want a war on your hands. You're going to need guns. You're going to need gulags. And the biggest hypocrisy of all, Marx and Engels, this is what these guys often do. They'll accuse other people of being greedy. These guys are greedy. They'll say of people who support free markets like me, well, you're a capitalist. I don't even know what a capitalist is. Where I get up in the morning and think about capital, right? I mean, no, you're focused on capital. You're focused on greed. You're obsessed with money. You're obsessed with it. Marx and Engels also said, and this is, I think, a valuable thing to get out there right now, that the difference between socialism and communism is that socialism leads to communism. So socialism is the final transitionary step to communism. So they viewed this giant sweep of the dialectic of history as all of the world moving, evolving from feudalism to slavery to capitalism to socialism to communism. So as the Christian aspires to heaven, the socialist aspires to communism. That's how they saw it. Now, I run into people today all the time, and I read this last week from somebody at, I think it was America Magazine or National Catholic Reporter. They said something, they said, well, Leo the 13th condemned communism, but never socialism. That's not true at all. In fact, Rerum Novarum never mentions communism and strictly condemns socialism. I mean, that guy doesn't know what he's talking about, right? I mean, you're completely wrong on that. And they'll say, well, because socialism's not as bad as communism. Well, socialism leads to communism. That's Marxist and Leninist theory. And I understand that today, where our country is redefining everything from marriage to your gender to a child in a womb. I guess they could try to redefine socialism if they want to. But according to Marxist-Leninist theory, socialism leads to communism. That's the goal. All right. So Karl Marx, this is why I said I could share these slides with you if you want them, because I know it's probably hard to read some of the content from where you're sitting. But Marx was born May 5th, 1818 in Trier, Germany. So Trier is spelled Trier, like Trier. And there is a great famous cathedral there. My glasses keep falling off. I'll just take them off. There's a great famous cathedral in Trier. It's been around for 1700 years. It was founded by Saint Helena, who was the mother of Constantine, right? Constantine. And Constantine, the great friend of Christianity, canonized in the Eastern Orthodox Church, but not in the Roman Catholic Church. So they have Constantine's Arch right next to the Colosseum in Rome. But Marx was born in the shadow of that great cathedral, if you can imagine that. In fact, that cathedral, so St. Helena is the one who went to the Holy Land and came back with all sorts of great relics, right? The spear put into the side of Jesus by Longinus, that today is in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Crown of Thorns, where is that today? Yeah, Notre Dame, right? Notre Dame in Paris. In fact, when it caught on fire, a heroic priest went in and grabbed the crown of thorns and ran it out of the building. She also found the holy robe, she believes, that Jesus, that the Roman soldiers cast lots for at the base of the cross during the crucifixion. That holy robe is in the cathedral in Trier. In one of Karl Marx's demonic plays, he wrote plays and poetry about the devil. He has the like devil character who's just sawing on this violin and summing up the powers of darkness. Marx not only wrote the characters and the dialogue, but also the backdrop, the costume, everything. The guy who's working on the violin is wearing the holy robe of Jesus from that cathedral. Marx loved to mock religion. And he and his wife, there's an exchange where she's making fun of these stupid, superstitious, idiot Christians who come in pilgrimage every year to see this robe of Jesus. So they were very contemptuous of religion. His father, Heinrich, the father converted to Lutheranism. Marx was Jewish. The family, he came from a long line of fairly Orthodox Jews. Now, under some historians say social pressures in the day, because this was an overwhelmingly Christian village that the Marx family converted. I don't know, I think Heinrich looked like a kind of, I can't say that was true. He looked like a fairly serious Christian. He was pretty secular in some ways. Read Voltaire to his son. That's not a good thing to do. But he told Karl Marx, he said, Karl, religion is good for a man. It's good to have something higher to believe in, gives you a set of morals. Marx in 1894 was baptized. He was baptized into the Christian faith as a Lutheran. So the family chose Lutheranism. And his mother didn't want to join, didn't want the family to come into the church. So Marx was a fairly serious Christian as a teenager. And then he loses the faith when he goes to, everybody, college. That's their job. That's the job of the colleges. Nothing has changed there, right? That's the job of the college. He also ran into an atheist professor named Bruno Bauer, who was very anti-Semitic. And kind of that starts pushing Marx onto this weird path of being kind of a self-hating Jew. So an ethnic Jew who bashes other Jews and makes fun of Judaism. They formed together a journal called the Annals of Atheism. So they would ride together. They did all these different stunts together. They would go into churches and sit in the pew and make noises, disrupt the service. In one case, when the village used to, every Palm Sunday, they celebrate, of course, Palm Sunday, he and Bruno Bauer rode into town on donkeys, kind of mocking the entrance of Christ into Jerusalem. So I thought that was a lot of fun. On religion, my favorite quote from Marx on this, I think the most revealing, is one hardly anyone knows. Communism begins where atheism begins. Fulton Sheen found that in one of the early writings of Marx and used to quote it a lot. The most famous quote from Marx on religion is what? Religion is the opium of the masses, the opiate of the masses. That comes from this document, Contribution to Hegel's Philosophy of the Right. It's kind of a clunky title. But he says here, man makes religion. Religion does not make man. This is a theme of a lot of these guys, right? The idea that religion doesn't really exist. God doesn't really exist. We've made up God. We don't come from God. We make up the idea of God. And he's got this long quote, and here's the setup to the line about the opium of the masses. Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opium of the masses. And I've been in seminars and lectures where a sympathetic pro-Marxist professor will say, well, when he was talking about opium of the masses, he doesn't really oppose religion. He just means that, it's kind of like a pacifier to people. And, it is, right? So I don't think that that's necessarily all that negative. Well, no, you got to read the whole thing. You got to read the whole context. The heart of a heartless world, the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people. Had a very negative view about religion. And on that, I'm just getting started. So the 1844 essay, he also said here, the criticism of religion disillusions man. Religion is only the illusory sun which revolves around man, as long as he does not revolve around himself. He felt that man needed to revolve around himself. You were your own orbit around your own sun. This was just complete moral relativism. Not a believer in an outside absolute force, right? I mean, it was about you. It wasn't about God. It wasn't about submitting yourself to God. I'll give you some quotes from him on that in a minute. He thought this whole idea of submission to this God was like a form of cowardice or self-abasement. He also said in that essay, and I think this is really striking, and hardly anyone ever talks about it, and I was worried about getting in trouble with this, putting this in the book, because I teach at a Christian college, which is largely evangelical Protestant. But he commends Martin Luther. And what he likes about Luther, it's not that, look, Luther wouldn't have liked Marx, okay? Luther was a committed believer in God, though he broke away from the church, of course, started the Protestant Reformation, or Protestant Rebellion, as some Catholics call it. But what he liked about Luther was that Luther provided a crucial historical break from the Catholic Church. And by doing that, that allowed you to have your own individual interpretation. Outside of the church, beyond the church, you no longer had to submit to what the magisterium was telling you to do, or as he put it, the Pope, right? But you could now read for yourself and come to your own interpretation. And for Marx, that's like, whoa, that's huge. That's huge, right? That's great. Because if we could just start that break away from the Roman Catholic Church as the authority, and we can start interpreting ourselves, we can start to revolve around ourselves. and we can eventually come to our own conclusions. So even though he wouldn't support Luther religious-wise, and Luther wouldn't have supported him, Luther provides that crucial break for Marx. Marx on criticism and abolition. The most frequently used words in Marx's writings and in the Communist Manifesto are abolition, abolish, and criticize, criticism. All the time, over and over again. In a letter to Arnold Bruges, Marx called for the ruthless criticism of everything that exists. Everything that exists. He does this all the time, by the way. It's not like, well, we need to ruthlessly criticize the things in society that are unjust, right? I mean, this guy is like totally ruthless criticism of everything that exists. In the close of the manifesto, he calls for the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. Forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. So this guy isn't a tinkerer. Well, it's a pretty good book. He talks about helping the poor and sharing. No, he talks about abolishing everything that exists, forcibly overthrowing it. Talks about abolishing all religion, all morality, the family, not just capital, entire states, systems, all social existing conditions. This is why he got the attention of the Pope and the Tsar and everybody else. They read this stuff and said, yeah, but these guys are crazy. I mean, this is, I remember Dennis Prager interviewed me about this book, and he said, it's just pure nihilism. And I was talking to Jordan Peterson interviewed me about this book, and I quoted Prager, and he said, and Peterson said, no, it's not just nihilism, right? It's even worse than nihilism. I mean, at least the nihilist kind of believes it has a belief, right? I mean, this guy just wants to throw out everything completely. Marx had a favorite quote. All right, is this not chilling? From Goethe's Faust. What Marx really wanted to be was a poet, a playwright. That's why he wrote all this poetry about the devil. And you see in the start of my book, The Devil and Karl Marx, I give quotes from his plays where he's talking about the devil. I mean, he wanted to be nothing less than the Goethe of his age. I mean, an economist? He was certainly not an economist. I mean, that's really clear. But Goethe's Faust, he said, I have a favorite line, Marx said, from the Mephistopheles character in Goethe's Faust. Who's the Mephistopheles character? The devil. Yeah, the devil. I mean, if you ask me or Vicky or Ken, right, or Steve, ask us for like a favorite quote, we might give you a Bible verse or a quote from a saint. Catherine Siena, right, set the world on fire. John Paul II, be not afraid. Marx said, yes, my favorite is from the Mephistopheles character. Everything that exists deserves to perish. Everything that exists deserves to perish. Everything. Yeah, exactly. Everything. And think about that. Everything deserves to perish. So picture Marx as not this happy-go-lucky, bearded kind of Santa Claus walking around. Let me share some stuff with you, right? I mean, picture Marx in the middle of a burnt-down village, completely razed, R-A-Z-E-D, right? Now we can begin. Everything that exists deserves to perish. And what are our universities teaching people about Marx, right? That's the worst part. Marx on Christianity. The social principles of Christianity preach what? Cowardice, self-contempt, abasement, submission, humility. I look at that and I think, submission, humility, those are good things, right? Not in Marx's, not to him. Because in Marx's view, the more of himself that man gives to God, the less he has in himself. Yeah, complete opposite of Christianity. Complete opposite. John the Baptist. What's the Baptist quote? I must increase, or I must decrease, so he must increase, right? Marx is just completely flipping that. The cover of the Jesuit magazine, America Magazine, they had a piece in the summer of 2019 called "The Catholic Case for Communism." I know, it's unbelievable. I was on vacation in New Jersey, and I got a call from Al Cresta's show, it was Drew Mariani's show, and they said, we need you to come on. You won't believe what America Magazine has just published. And the author was a guy who was a member of the Canadian Communist Party. And I read this, and I thought, there's not even anything new in here. And just completely crazy. I mean, that would have gotten America Magazine excommunicated under the 1949 papal decree by Pope Pius XII. And here they are publishing junk like this. You read the reader comments, and readers wrote things like, what's America going to publish next? The Catholic Case for Atheism? All right. The Catholic Case for Satanism? Right? The Catholic Case for Communism. And there's that picture of, in fact, it's with the article, they put it with the article, of Evo Morales, the communist leader of Bolivia, handing to Pope Francis a communist crucifix. Yeah, you should see the picture. It's got this crucifix and hammers. Well, he accepts it, but I mean, Francis was not good on communism. I'll talk about that later. He did say it was wrong. Some pictures have him smiling when he's holding it. Some have him just kind of looking at it. John Paul II would have wrung the guy's neck with it, probably. And a big difference in the two, John Paul II, Karol Wojtyła, came out of communism in Poland. And Pope Francis came out of Argentina, home of Che Guevara, right? Juan Perón. An Argentinian friend of mine who's a free marketer said that in Argentina, he and some of his friends used to refer to Pope Francis as JP2, Juan Perón II. Yeah, I know, that really hit me. I thought, whoa, seriously? Wow. Liberation theology came out of that area, which he supposedly rejected, but still you could just see in Francis a lot of, I'll talk more about this in the next presentation, a lot of stuff it's not Marxist, because you can see this is what Marxism is, okay? It's kind of pro-redistributionist, kind of soft on collectivism, kind of some forms of, kind of milder influence of liberation. It's not good, right? George Young, who was a Marx contemporary, said that Marx calls Christianity one of the most immoral religions. The Catholic Case for Communism. Right? Marx's faith instead was in evolution. So his real system was evolution. And Engels said at the eulogy for Marx's funeral, he quoted not Jesus, not the Beatitudes, not a saint, not one of the apostles, not Scripture, but Darwin. And they believed that Marx, he tried to argue that Marx was doing for the social sciences what Darwin had done for the hard sciences. So just as Darwin had discovered the evolution of the human species, by the way, Darwin was a Christian, Marx had discovered the evolution of the species in the new dialectic to this world of communism. Engels also gave the eulogy at Marx's wife's funeral, where she had this big red casket, and he said, "Here lies the vivacious Jenny," and gives this kind of empty, dead, uninspiring statement about her belief in evolution. How uplifting at that moment, right? Here she is, just food for the worms. He didn't say that, but Leon Trotsky, who are the three key founders of Bolshevism? Lenin, Stalin and Trotsky. Trotsky was a big evolutionist, and as he says here, Darwin destroyed the last of my ideological prejudices. The idea of evolution took possession of me completely. Darwin stood for me like a mighty doorkeeper at the entrance of the temple of the universe. I was intoxicated with his thought. Darwin stood there as the mighty gatekeeper, right, at the temple of the universe. You see how these guys who make fun of religion, in fact, treat their Marxist faith like a religion. All right, warning, trigger warning, offensive content. I was debating whether or not I should even put this in here. Did you look at this beforehand? I don't know.
No.
All right.
They can handle it.
They can handle it. Hey, it's the truth, right? And Marx was a racist. And by the way, I mean, I'm writing a book defending Ronald Reagan on race. There's like one comment that Reagan made to Nixon in a phone call in 1972, which I have a whole chapter on actually explaining what Reagan meant by that. And they're using that to cancel Reagan and rename buildings that were named after him. Guys like Marx, gals like Margaret Sanger, have some of the most vile statements on race, including using the N-word. Ronald Reagan never once in his life used the N-word. Everybody even said that. These people use it all the time, and they love him in the universities. They don't get canceled, right? He used the N-word all the time. Marx believed that human beings evolved from apes. All human beings evolved from apes. And he put black people on a lower evolutionary scale, closer to the apes than the rest of us, as he put it. Nathaniel Wheel, who was a former Marxist scholar who translated a lot of Marxist works, throughout Marx's writings, you can see in letters that he wrote to Engels, he actually uses the N-word, the English racial epithet, while he's writing in German. And the German word that would be the equivalent of like Negro is a different word altogether. So you're reading this German and it's like all of a sudden, whoa, what's N-I-G-G? Whoa, look at that. But he used that language a lot. He applied it to Ferdinand Lassalle, who was a Marx, one of the many people Marx attacked. Pointed out, it is perfectly clear to me that as the shape of his head and the growth of his hair indicates, he is descended from the Negroes. Examining his cranial formation, unless his mother or grandmother on the father's side was crossed with a N-word. And he used words all the time like greasy Jew. And remember, he's a Jew. The Jewish N-word referring to somebody. Marx was this hateful, nasty guy who just flung vitriol at people all the time. This poor fellow was Marx's son-in-law. He was married to one of Marx's daughters. By the way, Marx is the only figure that I know of in history who had 3 daughters who committed suicide. 2 of them in suicide pacts with their husbands. And one of them, and Marx in his poetry wrote all the time about pale maidens committing suicide by hemlock and poisoned and all these other things. And one of Marx's daughters committed suicide by poison. And it was in a pact with her husband, and he made her take the poison first, and then he violated the pact. He didn't take it. People thought that he should have been prosecuted for that. The other Marx son-in-law, this poor guy, he had in his bloodline Cuban roots. And Marx and Engels, being evolutionary biological racists, they sat around to try to figure out what percentage of N-word DNA came from Paul, right? They called Paul Lafargue Negrillo, or the gorilla. That was his name for him. And in one case, Engels wrote a letter to Paul's wife, Marx's daughter, saying, I see that he's running for office in this district in Paris. Well, given that that district contains a zoo, and given that he is I'll fill in the blank, that is one step closer to monkeys than the rest of us, you should make a mighty fine zookeeper. So you've got this all through their writings. And they get away with it. They get away with it. Because the people at the universities in cancel culture like them. Just like Margaret Sanger. If they could build a progressive Mount Rushmore, they'd put her face on it, even though she had a Negro project. Here's Marx from his 1844 essay on the Jewish question. Here's what he thought of Jews. This ought to get him canceled in the universities. What is the worldly cult of the Jew? Haggling. What is the Jew's worldly god? Money. Money. Money is the jealous god of Israel, before whom no other god may exist. The bill of exchange is the actual god of the Jew. The Jew had become impossible. This sounds like something you'd read from Hitler, talking about the final solution. The emancipation of the Jews in the final analysis is the emancipation of mankind from Judaism. The Israelite faith is repulsive to me. Wow. Find one quote like that from Donald Trump and everyone in the world would know about it. They'd be holding candlelight vigils outside the White House, bawling until he resigned. And these guys get away with it. Marx's faith in communism. So as I said, they end up treating communism as sort of their faith. Look at this statement. This really tells you where they're coming from. Keep in mind, they make fun of Christians, right? Oh, you guys believe in this. As this British professor said to me, you're magic sky fairy who will take you to this heaven that you imagine, this utopia that you imagine. Well, look at how they think. He wrote this in German Ideology, his 1845 book. In the communist system, where nobody has exclusive sphere of activity, but each can become accomplished in any branch that he wishes. Here's the key. Here's the key to their utopia. Society regulates the general production. Socialists call this common ownership of the means of production. Margaret Sanger said, well, as I was told by Soviet officials, once you have all of this, an abortion will be neither necessary because the state will ensure the full happiness of everybody. So once you society regulates general production, what will happen? It'll make it possible for me to do one thing today and another tomorrow. Hunt in the morning, fish in the afternoon, rear cattle in the evening, criticize after dinner, without ever becoming a hunter, fisherman, herdsman, or critic. So communism will give you utopia. By the way, this is why they get so angry at all of us who resist their attempts at common ownership of the means of production. Don't you realize what we're trying to give you? If you would just give up all your private property and your inheritances and let us anointed experts from the universities manage your stuff, we could give you utopia, man. Which is why the people who resist have to be shipped off to the gulag and sometimes eliminated. In fact, in the Soviet Union, they would put resistors like Vladimir Bukovsky, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, Bukovsky in particular, they would put you in insane asylums. They considered you crazy because you didn't realize you resisted this heavenly, earthly utopia that they were going to give you. Because of your selfishness, right? Here is Mikhail Bakunin, who was a Marx contemporary. He wrote the book, the 1870 book, God and the State. He and Marx were, at first, they were good friends. They saw each other often. But as pretty much happened with everybody that Marx was a friend with, Marx eventually severed the relationship because he hated everybody. Engels was one of the only ones who hung in there, continued to be his friend. In fact, Engels was Marx's sugar daddy because Marx refused to work and provide a roof over his family. You know, Engels came in through Engels' father's inheritance and subsidized Marx. They almost split permanently when Engels' mistress died and he was heartbroken over it. And Marx wrote him a letter, kind of with a perfunctory, sorry about your loss in the first sentence, and then got on to the more important issue of asking Engels for more money. And Engels exploded at him in the follow-up letter. Even my capitalist friends showed more sympathy than you. But usually Marx would split relationships. But for a while he was close with Bakunin, and these two guys saw eye to eye on religion. Here's what he said. Kind of looks like Marx. This isn't exactly the kind of guy you want your daughter to bring home, right? I mean, look at him. He wrote this: if God really existed, it would be necessary to abolish him. Think about what they're saying there. They don't want God to exist. They don't like the rules of the Bible and the absolutes. I mean, God says you can have private property, right? So if he really exists, you'd have to abolish him. They want to abolish everything. They want to abolish God if they can. All religions are cruel. All are founded on blood. But who did he like? Satan, Lucifer. But it was very similar to what Saul Alinsky says in his dedication of Rules for Radicals, which he dedicates to Lucifer, who he calls, it's an acknowledgement in the start of the book, and he says, to that first rebel and thinker who founded his own kingdom, Lucifer. And look how similar that is to what Bakunin wrote. Satan was the eternal rebel, the first free thinker, and the emancipator of worlds. The emancipator of worlds. Or Saul Alinsky called him the very first radical who rebelled against the establishment. It's got to make you wonder, too, how, well, if they don't believe in the supernatural or God, why do they believe in Satan? I don't know that they do, but they see him as like a figure of rebellion, and that's what they like about him. Bakunin said this, and I know this is a long quote. He wrote this in his book, God and the State, 1870. Jehovah, who of all the good gods adored by men was certainly the most jealous, the most vain, the most ferocious, the most unjust, the most bloodthirsty, the most despotic, the most hostile to human dignity and liberty. This guy better hope he's right that God doesn't exist, because I got news for you. He's coming. You better be right, Bakunin, I'll tell you that, because you're going to be in big trouble in the afterlife. Of course, he doesn't fear that. Jehovah had just created Adam and Eve to satisfy, we don't know what caprice. Actually, read Genesis, give the answer there. No doubt to while away his time, which must weigh heavy on his hands in his eternal egoistic solitude, or that he might have some new slaves. He wished, therefore, that man, destitute of all understanding of himself, should remain an eternal beast, ever on all fours before the eternal God, his creator and his master. But here steps in Satan, the good God, the eternal rebel, the first free thinker and the emancipator of worlds. He makes man ashamed of his bestial ignorance and obedience. He emancipates him. Satan is their great emancipator, not God. Marx, Lenin, and Bolshevism. So the first major disciple of Marx, Bolshevism, Soviet Union, the communists take over in the Soviet Union, October 1917. They hated religion just as much. Lenin said, all worship of a divinity is a necrophilia. Yeah, you guys know what necrophilia is, right? No? Well, Google it. I don't want to describe it in this.
You might have YouTube banned.
Yes, right. All worship of divinity is a necrophilia. There is nothing more abominable than religion. He said, like Marx said, religion is the opium of the masses. It is a kind of spiritual booze. Medieval mildew. Nikolai Bukharin, who was one of the founding editor of Pravda and one of the early core of Bolsheviks, said a fight to the death must be declared upon religion. Take on religion at the tip of the bayonet. And America Magazine, you guys watching online, right? You guys published the article, The Catholic Case for Communism. The founder of Pravda said, religion and communism are incompatible, both theoretically and practically. Communism is incompatible with religious faith. They would hate your article. They would tell you you're wrong. So, yeah. They'd say, what is this? This isn't a Catholic publication? Don't you guys know that communism and religion are incompatible? What are you talking about? Leon Trotsky, another of the Bolshevik founders. They together, Trotsky and Lenin, launched the group, the League of the Militant Godless. It was an actual government organization in the Soviet Union. He said of Marxism, man will at last begin to harmonize himself. The human species will once again enter the state of radical reconstruction and become in his own hands the object of the most complex methods. Man will make it his goal to create a higher socio-biological type, a Superman, if you will. This is what communism will bring you, you see? Man will become incomparably stronger, wiser, more subtle. His body will become more harmonious under communism. His movements more rhythmic. His voice more melodious. And the average human type will rise to the heights of an Aristotle, a Goethe, a Marx. And beyond this ridge, other peaks will emerge. Yeah. That's why Ronald Reagan referred to, he said, communism, well, that religion of theirs, there they go again, right? There they go again. Arthur Koestler, an ex-communist who wrote the book Darkness at Noon, look how he described the communist faith. To say the one had seen the light is a poor description of the mental rapture which only the convert knows. The new light seems to pour from all directions across the skull. The whole universe falls into patterns, like stray pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, assembled one stroke. This isn't God that's doing this. This is communism will do this for you. There is now an answer to every question. Doubts and conflicts are a matter of the tortured past. Nothing henceforth can disturb the convert's inner peace and serenity except the occasional fear of losing the faith again. Losing thereby what alone makes life worth living, and falling back into the outer darkness. I mean, even Saul on the road to Damascus didn't describe his conversion like that. Right? Bam, it's the ground. Why are you persecuting me, Saul? Who are you, sir? Right? I mean, this is unbelievable. Raymond Aron referred to communism as the opium of the intellectuals. All right, so with this, they launched a war on religion in the Soviet Union. This is what every communist country did. They all went after religion. All went after religion. And I don't know, maybe one of our intrepid professors in universities today would say, well, I don't know why you're going after religion there in your country. I mean, I don't know. I mean, Marx loved religion, right? I mean, look at America Magazine, Catholic Case for Communism, right? Catholics should be communists. Oh, what are you talking about? But the Bolsheviks were like, no, we read all the books, man. We hate religion. We're going to destroy religion. So they immediately go after it. There were 657 churches operating in Moscow alone on the eve of the revolution. By the 1970s, they were down to 46. Banned religious weddings, banned religious funerals, banned baptisms. And as communists did, they instead did red weddings, red funerals, and what we called red baptisms, where the mother would recite a pledge promising to make her child a worthy builder of communism. So in all these cases, they took out God, they took out religion, and they substituted the state. Alexander Solzhenitsyn in the Gulag Archipelago says that nuns were put in special sections of the Gulag with prostitutes because they were dubbed whores to Christ. It wasn't just that they were irreligious or unreligious or had a separation of church and state. This was the League of the Militant Godless at work. They wanted you to renounce your faith, to renounce religion. And they did it everywhere. Cambodia, Pol Pot, 80,000 Buddhist monks in 1975, about 4,000 4 years later. They were forced to either renounce their vows, marry, or be executed. And a lot of them said, okay, you'll have to turn me into a martyr, you'll have to execute me. They did it in Castro's Cuba, which was probably the most religious country in the whole Western Hemisphere, other than America. They even did it in Afghanistan to Muslims. I mean, everywhere they go after religion. Why? It's because it's what communism teaches. Mikhail Gorbachev said, yes, it is sadly true. Our predecessors orchestrated a wholesale war on religion. Atheism took rather savage forms in our country. Gorbachev was the guy who finally called it off. John Paul II considered Gorbachev a providential man, as he put it. Reagan became obsessed after their first meeting together at the Geneva Summit in November 1985 at the idea that maybe Gorbachev might be a Christian. Gorbachev is very complicated. I could talk about him for an hour. In fact, my book, A Pope and a President, I don't have any copies of it here, sorry about that, but we almost added Gorbachev as the third person in it because, and he died just a couple years ago now. Yeah. And he never publicly came out and said whether he was a Christian. And I tried to interview him, tried to ask him, but he kept it to himself. He wouldn't talk about it. Kept it as a very private thing.
Think he was afraid?
I don't know. I mean, at that point, he didn't need to be. Because once the Soviet Union ceased to exist, Boris Yeltsin became president, rebuilt the cathedral that Stalin demolished. Yeltsin was a very devout Christian. I mean, Putin, I mean, I don't like Putin, but Putin's Russian Orthodox Church, right? I mean, he's pro-church, he's not anti-church.
He says he is.
Yeah, exactly. But, I mean, today to be religious in Russia, beginning in the early 1990s, is a positive thing. There is no reason for Gorbachev to not tell people about this. There was a London Times reporter, early 2000, who was in Assisi and was going through and walked in, and there at the tomb of St. Francis, he looks down, and Gorbachev is there praying. And waited till he got up and asked him, and he said, "Aren't you Mikhail Gorbachev?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, what are you doing here?" And Gorbachev started telling him about his devotion to Francis of Assisi. I worked with Bill Clark, who was Ronald Reagan's closest advisor, a very devout Catholic. It's like another grandfather to me. I became Clark's biographer. We immediately tried to get translation of Francis' writings of Assisi in Russian to Gorbachev. And he was, but he was at the very least, he called off the war on religion. That's the beautiful thing that he did, and began a kind of explosion in seminaries, churches reopening. Yeah. And a rather savage atheist was Karl Marx. All right, so there you go. Any questions? Yeah.
So if you go back several charts, but you don't have to, when you talked about Marx, basically living off of Engels,
Yeah, yeah.
so the guy was nothing more than a what do you call it, parasite.
Yes, yes, he
And so
was.
he tells us by his life
Yes, it's typical.
what he means by communism.
Yeah, yes,
It's
yeah, yeah.
that you are a parasite on the rest.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. In the Devil and Karl Marx, I quote Aristotle, who says something like, "Men start revolutions for personal, basically that reflect what they want." Right?
Yeah.
Marx wanted a society that would take care of people like him,
Yeah.
where he wouldn't have to work. But the fact of the matter is, under Bolshevism, Marx would have been considered a work shirker
Yeah.
who wasn't working, and they would have carted him off to Siberia. I mean, they would not have put up with that for a second. However, here's the irony of all this. Marxism and communism, all right, you have to understand, folks, it's for the ruled, not the rulers. So Marx would be like Lenin and Stalin and all the others, like Fidel Castro. Everybody in Cuba makes $200 a year. Doctors, janitors, school teachers, lawyers, everybody. But Fidel Castro died worth a couple $2 billion, okay? So this is, they're not going to give up their property. They're not going to give up their house. That's for all of you, right? For us kind of, bovine sheep element, right? We're the ruled. The rulers, I mean, AOC's Green New Deal that wants to ban flights across the country, and you think to yourself, what, we're all going to take the train from like New York all the way to California? Well, you all are going to take the train from New York to California, right? But they get the private jet because they are, to quote Thomas Sowell, right, they are the anointed. They're the ruling class. They got the degrees from the universities. They know better than you what's good for you. They'll get their dacha on the Black Sea. They'll get their cars. They could fly around and burn all the jet fuel they want, right? Marxism is for the masses, not the masters. So Marx would have seen himself as one of the anointed class who would have told the rest of you, morons and serfs and idiots, what to do. And if you didn't give up your property, well, you're the one that would be carted off to Siberia. They always did this all the time. They're the biggest hypocrites ever. You cannot find a poor Marxist ruler. They're all what they call mansion Marxists. There's the 1% versus the 99. The 1% are the rulers, the apparatchiks. Yeah, those rulers don't apply to that. Those rules don't apply to them. Marx's wife and mother both expressed the wish that, quote, Karl would start earning some capital rather than just writing about it. Refused to get a job. Refused to get a job. He had more important work to do, like take away your private property.
It's kind of like Bernie Sanders. The guy's been in public office all his life.
Yeah.
He's got 3 multi-million-dollar homes. How the hell did he do that?
He does, and Sanders was a Trotskyist. So Sanders was, we've never found evidence of it, but he supported the Socialist Workers' Party. If you Google Socialist Workers' Party, it'll pop up, Trotskyist Socialist Workers' Party. He was a formal presidential elector to the Socialist Workers' Party in 1980 and 1984. So when normal Americans were trying to consider whether to vote for like Reagan or Carter, Sanders' guy was the head of the Socialist Workers' Party. And Sanders, James Carville, the Clinton advisor, used to point out, he used to say, Bernie's not a Democrat. He only became a Democrat when he ran for president in 2016. Sanders was always an independent. In fact, I think he's an independent again.
Yes, he is.
So, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, which is the largest socialist organization in the United States. Ilhan Omar was DSA. Rashida Tlaib, DSA. They only became Democrats when they wanted to run for Congress. And then what they did was they ran in Democratic primaries in safe Democrat districts. They defeated the traditional Democrat, And then they weren't going to lose in November because they're like 80+% registered Democrat districts. So Cenk Uygur says the goal of these people is to take over the Democratic Party. He says we need dozens of AOCs and Ilhan Omars. So when we do that, the Democratic Party, quote, will freak the hell out, unquote. So they want to go through the Democrats and turn it into a far left radical party. Yeah.
My understanding is that AOC won by what? 17% of the people turned out to vote or something like that?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
ridiculously low turnout.
Yeah, you don't even need to bother. She doesn't even need a campaign. I mean, they're going to vote for her no matter what. Yeah, yeah.
That's what tribes do.
Yeah, right.
All right, so just to get us on time, we're gonna take a 10-minute